Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wa salatu wa salam ala khatam al-anbiya'i wa sayyid al-mursalin nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. اللهم افتح علينا فتوح العارفين ووفقنا توفيق الصالحين وانفعنا اللهم بالقرآن بذكر حكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما وعملا متقبلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم إنا نسألك خير هذا اليوم فتحه ونصره ونوره وبركته وهداه، ونعوذ بك من شره وشر ما فيه وشر ما قبله وشر ما بعده، ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. So today we will continue with the study of the introduction to Islamic virtue ethics. And as I like to do is always try to sort of recap before I go into the subsequent topic. And every lesson that I begin, try to offer some sort of context for what will we study today. First and foremost is remember that the aim of virtue ethics is about becoming a better person, or one way you could say it's about learning how to be good at being human. And that is to say that we, as mentioned before, believe that there is a fundamental human nature which goes beyond biology and physiology. And also that virtue ethics, that we call virtue ethics, has many different names in the Arabic language. The most popular of those names is tasawwuf, or translated as Sufism. And of course we know that there are many different types of Sufism and different types of Sufis as well. But we're not talking about every type of it. We're talking about a type of virtue ethics or behavioral refinement which is rooted in the Quranic teachings and the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. The concept itself of virtue ethics or behavioral refinement has, or as fundamentally we can say, is about the interiorization of the Islamic law. And for this reason, scholars refer to akhlaq or ilm-suluk or tasawwuf as fiqh al-batin, the law of the interior, the jurisprudence of the interior, and normal jurisprudence referred to as fiqh al-zahir, the jurisprudence of the exterior. So both of them fall in the category of praxis, but the ultimate aim of Sufism is about correcting the state of the human heart, the condition of the heart as we do our actions, or I guess you would say in one way as well, we could say that the aim is for us to be led to acquire a disposition which is inclined towards good. So it's one thing to do a good act, but another thing to want to do a good act, even when you don't have the opportunity. And so the aim of virtue ethics is for us to become people of virtue, is for us to develop a second nature. And that nature is one which is inclined towards good, and in some ways it is about returning us to our original innocence, the state that we were in before being cast out of Jannah, even though we know that it will be impossible to return to that, but at least we have to endeavor and try our best to do so. At least most people won't be able to be returned to that. And this is fundamentally the essence of what we call tawbah. And the word tawbah, coming from an Arabic word which means to return. This is fundamentally what this particular enterprise is all about. And in another sense, when we study virtue ethics, as mentioned before during a couple weeks ago, that the study of virtue ethics is fundamentally an inductive study of Islamic theology. It is about doing theology inductively. That is to say that when we consider the reality of the human being, that we are people, we are a creature who commit acts. We do things. We act, we do good, we do evil at times, but also we encounter events in our lives. We encounter events in our lives, and those events require from us a certain type of reaction, which is considered to be an appropriate type of reaction to those events. Say, for instance, death. When the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, was holding his son Ibrahim radiallahu anh, and before he died, and a tear came from his eye, and when asked about it, and he said in the hadith, al-qalbu yahzun wal-aynu tadma' wal-qalbu yahzun, the eye tears up and the heart it grieves, وَلَا نَقُولُ إِلَّا مَا يُرْضِي اللَّهِ, but we only say what is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. أو كما قال صلى الله عليه وسلم. So that is to say, this event, this death of his son, was something that he encountered, and so he's expected to react in a certain way. And so in one way, every single situation, event, and every person or thing that we come in contact with is something that should remind us of the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at any given moment. And in that sense, when we are interacting with the creation, we are fundamentally interacting with our Creator, in that we are learning much about the personality of our Creator, because it is He who sends to us the test. He sends to us to test through people, through other types of creatures, but then also through tribulation and times of ease as well. So in times of ease, we're tested and we're expected to react in a certain way as well. So in that sense, when we talk about doing theology inductively, this is really what I mean by it, in that this is fundamentally what virtue ethics is all about. And so if we return to the text and recall that the chapter begins by with a discussion of tawbah, of repentance. And then that section is followed up with a discussion of what we call taqwa, God consciousness. And we learn with regard to the definition of a taqwa is that it is fundamentally, it consists of two different things. One is the avoidance of certain actions, and secondly, the compliance with certain commandments that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given to us. Now, that in itself, repentance itself necessitates that there must be some sort of abandonment or avoidance of something. Because how can I say I've repented if I have not stopped doing something? So he follows tawbah with taqwa. So taqwa is about avoidance to begin with. So in that avoidance of a thing can be something an external, a physical act, something that I'm doing right now, and it may be affecting myself or others. But then also their avoidance or resistance or suppression to certain things within myself, right? Which it could be something that is simply harming me, or it could be something harming someone else as well. And we're going to come to that next. So he talked about taqwa, وَحَصِلُ التَّقْوَى اجْتِنَابٌ وَامْتِثَالٌ فِي ظَاهِرٍ وَبَاطِنٍ بِذَاتُ نَالٍ. And then after this, he moves on, and after speaking about taqwa in its general sense, then he moves on and talks about taqwa and gives examples of what we would call things which are to be avoided on the external world. And so he talks about, first and foremost, يَغُضُّ عَيْنَيْهِ عَنِ الْمَحَارِمِ. One is to lower one's gaze from things that are unlawful to look at, right? So an example of ijtinab al-zahiri, right? Ijtinab al-zahiri, an external thing which we are to avoid, that we should avoid looking at things that are unlawful. يَكُفُّ سَمْعُهُ عَنَ الْمَآثِمِ. And we should not look at or listen to things that are sinful. كَغِيبَةٍ نَمِيمَةٍ زُورٌ كَذِبْ لِسَانُهُ أَحْرَى بِتَرْكِ مَا جُلِبْ. Right, and he mentions examples of those type of things that we should avoid, listening to, backbiting, slander, false testimony. And then he goes on to say, and the tongue itself is even more deserving or it's more appropriate that the tongue avoid those things as well. يتركه ما يحفظ بطنه من الحرام يتركه ما شبه باهتمامه, that one should guard one's stomach from that which is unlawful, be it unlawful wealth that one acquired through an unlawful means or unlawful food that one takes into one's body. And then also abandon whatever is a subject of doubt, right? So you abandon it bihtimam, with concern. And so what he means by this is we avoid things over which scholars differ about. So if you know that there's some scholars that say a certain thing is halal and other scholars say certain things haram, it's actually better for your soul, for the state of your soul, if you're uncertain, if you're still fluctuating between okay and not okay, that you should not obey your passion. You may look at the fact, okay, well, that actually may bring me some worldly benefit. It's like my wife sometimes, she sort of just tells this joke, and she, of course, it's just a joke, but she says, like, when it comes with Muslims, when it comes to making money, everything is halal here. Everything's halal, right? Right. And you can get that impression from certain Muslims. It's like, hey, well, I'm gonna get rich, halal, I'm going to look for that fatwa. So if you're obeying your passion, then that is a big problem, But if you find some are saying haram, some halal, and you're just, going to go with what your nafs says, that in itself is a more serious infraction that one commits there. Right, so avoid what is doubtful. Avoid what is doubtful. يحفظ فرجه ويتقي الشهيد. Guard one's private parts. One should guard his private parts and beware of the one who is ever present. في البطش والسعي لممنوع يريد. Right? In every serious undertaking and in striving for any prohibited matter one covets. Right, so one should constantly be remind oneself of the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that Allah sees everything that you do, that you can't escape from his vision, from his supervision. He constantly sees it and he knows it, even the state of your hearts. Right, and so he gives all these examples of taqwa with relationship to the things that we do with our limbs, or external, the external acts of the human person. And so we mentioned before that there's 7 limbs of the body with which we commit sin. We have the eyes, the ears, the tongue, the hands, the feet, the stomach, and one's reproductive organs. That these are the inroads to our heart and our minds and to our soul. The human being is what we call a psychosomatic creature. That is to say that we believe that we're not just a soul and we're not just simply flesh, that we're both flesh and we are spirit, and that what is done with the flesh, it actually influences the spirit or the soul. And what is done to the soul, or whatever the soul is fed, it impacts the limbs. And this is why we say that to the degree that one's heart is healthy, such will be the character, a conduct of the person. And to the degree of the corruption of our hearts, so such will be the character of the individual as well. Right, so because there's an effect that happens. This influences this. So we are both of these particular things. At least this is the mainstream sort of view about the human nature. And so, and that in mind is important, that we reflect upon those natures and that we be very wary about them as well. So what happens, what the author says next, he goes on and he says, وَيُوقِفُ الْأُمُورَ حَتَّى يَعْلَمَا مَا اللَّهُ فِيهِنَّ بِهِ قَدْ حَكَمَا. And one should halt all matters until he knows what Allah has judged in their regard. Now, this verse may sound like a redundancy, because he already said that يَحْفَظُ بَطْنَهُ مِنَ الْحَرَامِ يَتْرُكُ مَا شُبِّهَ بِاهْتِمَامِ, avoid or guard one's stomach from the haram, and abandon what things that cause you doubt with concern. But here, he actually is not talking about the same thing. This particular verse is actually talking about the importance or the obligation of seeking knowledge. The obligation of seeking knowledge before we do anything. Any undertaking, we don't just simply do it. I mean, because Nike tells you, right, tells you just do it, right? Sprite tells you, obey your thirst. And so no, يُوقِفُ الْأُمُورَ حَتَّى يَعْلَمَ مَا اللَّهُ فِيهِنَّ بِهِ قَدْ حَكَمَ. But rather, one should halt all matters until he knows what Allah has judged in their regard. What this means is that if you know you have to pray your prayer, then you have to learn how to pray. If you know it's time to fast Ramadan, then you have to learn the rules of the fast of Ramadan. If you know you want to go make Hajj, you learn the rules of Hajj. If you want to do business, you learn what is halal and what's haram in business transactions. If you want to get married, you learn what is necessary in order for you to get married. If you want to get divorced, then you need to learn what is the appropriate way to go about a divorce, right? And I often get calls. I mean, over the years, it's been, a number of years of this. I've counseled people in the past and about marriages, but often the call doesn't come until there's trouble. People, a lot of times, the first question, especially if it's a man, would be, what's the right way to go about getting a divorce? Alhamdulillah, some people actually ask that question. But sometimes it's like, well, I actually pronounced divorcing my wife 5 times or 10 times. What do I do now? It's like, well, you should have learned what you should do prior to doing something like that. You see, so this itself is just emphasizing the importance of us not making any given decision until we're totally certain that this is actually lawful to do in Islam. And so that in itself definitely, of course, it goes against a more general understanding that many people have, which is that things are by their presumptively lawful. Al-asl fil ashya' al-ibaha. Things are lawful until proven haram. So I can just do it until somebody tells me it's haram. And so this brings us to another issue, is that if this is about seeking knowledge, then we need to consider what the consequence of individuals in different states with relationship to knowledge. So for instance, if a person learns and acts upon their knowledge, then definitely that is a good thing. And it is a good thing because fundamentally, if I am acting upon what I've learned, then I'm obeying Allah with 2 acts of obedience. First, in learning what I've been told to learn, Quran tells us, "La taqfu ma laysa laka bihi ilm." Do not follow that by which you have no knowledge. Do not follow. So you should learn. فَعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهُ وَاسْتَغْفِرْ لِذَنْبِكَ. Know that there is no God except Allah, and then ask for forgiveness. And there are a number of different verses in a similar vein throughout the Quran with regard to the importance of seeking out knowledge. But if a person learns and acts upon their knowledge, and this is the ideal state, of course, you get a reward for learning and then a reward for obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or fulfilling whatever, or acting upon whatever you have learned. But then another state would be an individual who doesn't learn and also doesn't act upon what the learning demand from them. Now naturally, if that person, there's a famous saying that goes, ignorance is bliss, right? And it probably originates from the story of the garden, right? As long as he didn't eat from the tree, then they were in bliss. And then all of a sudden, once he ate from the tree, and some say the tree of knowledge, some say the tree of life, whatever. We don't know exactly what it was, but all of a sudden they came to know and came to realize they were naked, among other things. All of a sudden laws become a part of our existence, and and then punishment and reward, among other things. So there's some Muslims who actually have this attitude too. They say, well, as long as I don't know, I'm all right. But you have an obligation to learn. You have to have an obligation to learn. So if you are actually intentionally not learning your religion, I'm not totally sure if that you're going to be in a good state with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You think that just because I just won't study. No, you have to learn what your Creator expects from you. And if you refuse to learn what your Creator expects from you, then there may be painful chastisement awaiting for you. All right, and then thirdly, there's some people who learn and then they just don't act. And this is probably the state of most of us, right? We learn, we don't act upon what we learn, And of course, maybe I'm just speaking for myself, right? But there are many people, probably the majority of the people who don't learn and they don't act either. They just simply, I'm just not interested in learning those things. So يُقِفُ الْأُمُورَ حَتَّى يَعْلَمَ اللَّهُ فِيهِنَّ بِهِ قَدْ حَكَمَ. And so before moving on to the next set of verses, I think it's important to return to an earlier conversation which is related to our natures. And again, speaking about the difference between acts and dispositions. Now, the way that Allah created us, it says that we are motivated to act by our emotions and our appetites. And so, for instance, we think about the most primary of emotions, desire, fear, anger, for instance. Right? Fear induces us to act in a certain way. Desire, or just, like your carnal desire, you get hungry, you seek food, you get thirsty, you seek drink, you get sleepy, right? You want to get sleep, have a desire of sexual gratification, you seek some way to gratify yourself. You want to get rich or get wealthy, you seek wealth. So we have these appetites, Desire induces us to act. Fear may lead me to hide, or may lead me to hurt even as well. We see that, today with ignorance is the root of fear, and it leads to people, discrimination and prejudice and racism, and then physical attacks upon people. That fear usually is fueled by ignorance. If you don't know, fear of the unknown. The human being is an enemy of those things that he or she doesn't know. And then we have desire, fear, and then there's also anger as well. Many things make us angry, and we get angry, we can act certain ways. So we're motivated to act by our basic impulses, by our emotions, by our appetites. But at a certain point, these sources of action and the acts that ensue after these things produce those actions lead to a certain type of habit, and then that habit within the person develops into what we call as a second nature. It becomes a second nature. And that second nature is referred to in English as a disposition. Now, disposition can be either good or bad. So that disposition or that nature that I have developed is a nature which inclines me towards good, and if it does so, we call it virtue. Or if it's a disposition that inclines me towards evil, we call it a vice. And so what happens after time is that once I develop this disposition, this virtue or this vice, then the thing that motivates me to act no more is simply the emotion and the appetite that I originally had, but the actual disposition is what motivates me to act. And this is how we can explain things like addiction, for instance. If we think about vices, and some people become addicted to drugs or they become alcoholics, among other things, and it's not just simply a choice. Some people think, well, they're just choosing to drink. I'm choosing to do drugs. Once it becomes an addiction, you're not simply choosing. You're oriented towards this particular thing, even though it's destructive, and it's hard for you to overcome it. And so that being the case, with regard to these things, we need to really think about these other aspects of the we call other types of vices, which can be very harmful to the human soul. So in studying virtual ethics, we learn things we call virtue, like, for instance, practical wisdom is a virtue, prudence is a virtue, justice is a virtue, courage is a virtue. Is anything we call these the cardinal virtues, or the four of the four cardinal virtues, meaning that all other virtues fundamentally, at least according to those who accept this theory, all other virtues originate from these four. An example of this, when we think about, for instance, truthfulness, honesty, that the root of it in some regards is courage. That if you have the opportunity to lie, or you have a reason to lie, but instead of that you actually speak the truth and you're honest, then that itself is an act of courage. Because speaking the truth sometimes can be detrimental to a person. If a person comes to your house looking for a fugitive from justice, for instance, and you feel that that person is not a criminal, and you're hiding them away, you're giving them asylum, and then the police knock on your door and say, well, is so-and-so here in your house? And if you speak the truth and you tell them, that's an act of courage, but although it may not be an act of prudence, right? So sometimes there will be some conflict between the virtues, but that in itself is a process, and it takes time for us to develop a right type of practical wisdom in giving things. Now, in the Catholic tradition, they add to these virtues what we call the theological virtues. Now, so a virtue can be an intellectual virtue, it can be a moral virtue, it can be a theological virtue. So theological virtues, they say, are three others. The virtues of faith, of hope, and love. And so what they mean by these being theological virtues is because these are virtues that are actually directed towards God. Right. So in addition to these four, then you have these other three. So the four are courage, prudence, temperance, and justice. And then you add the other three, faith, hope, and love, which are directed towards God. And then you have what they call the cardinal virtues. So we learn the virtue, but we also have to learn vice, examples of vice, or for our purposes, what's more important is for us to learn about actions or acts of the heart. Remember, the heart is the command center. The heart is the command center. When I do with these, it can corrupt this, right? And so if I corrupt or weaken my command center, then it's hard for me to fight off other things, But then also sometimes the command center, has its own things that hurts itself. It self-destructs, right? And so those are some of the things that he talks about next. So he gives examples. Ibn Ashur gives examples of actions of the limbs, which are, if we are to avoid, which lead us to be characterized as a person of taqwa. And then now he talks about things of the heart. So he says, يُطَهِرُ قَلْبَ مِنَ الرِّيَاءِ وَحَسَدٍ عُجْبٍ وَكُلِّ دَاءٍ. And one should halt all matters. I'm sorry, I read that already. But he said, one should purify the heart from the desire for self-display, envy, self-amazement, and every spiritual malady. So one should purify the heart from the desire for self-display, envy, self-amazement, and every spiritual malady. Now, these three vices, we can say, I wouldn't call them vices, but call these acts of the heart, these three acts of the heart. The act of self-display, or we call ostentation, Riya, of jealousy, is an act of the heart, and Ujub, self-amazement or narcissism or vanity, whatever we want to call it. He mentions these three specifically, and that's because, according to many of the ethicists, that these are the three chief vices, or I keep saying vice, but the three chief acts of the heart or ills of the heart that we need to avoid. The three prohibitions of the heart that we need to avoid, and if we get control of these three, then the others are easy to overcome. So there are many different acts of the heart which are considered to be illnesses of the heart: resentment, anger, mocking the poor people for their poverty, magnifying the rich because of their affluence, boasting, snobbery. There's so many different examples of it, but he begins with these three. And the first being al-Riya, first being shown off. And al-Riya, or ostentation, is defined as seeking a special place in the hearts of people by exhibiting traits of goodness. Seeking a special place in the hearts of people by exhibiting traits of goodness. So when I should act for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I'm acting also for others. If I give charity, I'm not only giving charity to help the person and to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through helping that person. I may do it publicly. I do it so that people can say that I'm generous. Of course, everybody doesn't suffer from this, but many people do, if not most people do, suffer from this. When I lead the prayer, right, and I recite the Quran, I recite in a beautiful fashion, not only because I know it's pleasing to Allah, but also because I know people like it, and I sound good. Right. And I know people afterwards are going to say, oh man, I love your recitation. Right? So my intention gets polluted by these thoughts. And it's something different. It's not easy to overcome. I mean, mentioning these things is not to say that it's easy to overcome, but definitely we need to know what we're doing. What exactly am I doing? What is wrong with what I'm doing? And it is considered to be a form of idolatry, a form of association of partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's called a shirk al-khafi, subtle idolatry, or shirk al-asghar, the minor idolatry that the Prophet ﷺ mentioned in the hadith, إِنَّ أَخْوَفَ مَا أَخَافُ عَلَيْكُمْ الشِّرْكُ الْخَفِي الرِّيَاء أو كما قال, that the one thing that I'm most fearful for you is the subtle idolatry, ostentation, showing off. And al-Riya is also coupled with what's called sum'ah, which is actually when we speak with the aim of impressing people as well. We say things and do things like the example of recitation of the Quran. Either I'm reading it or I'm leading the prayer. And my prayer is supposed to be for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but I'm doing it so I'm also entertaining the people as well. And when I recite, I'm doing it to entertain the people as well. Now, of course, you have a challenge here, especially with regard to this example, in that Allah and His Messenger expect us to recite beautifully. زَيِّنُوا الْقُرْآنَ بِأَصْوَاتِكُمْ زَيِّنُوا أَصْوَاتِكُمْ بِالْقُرْآنِ. So beautify the Quran with your voices, as the hadith goes. And we're expected to do it. That is the sunnah, to do so. But then I have the challenge, okay, well, if I do so, then I'm afraid that I'm going to be trying to impress people. Now, we don't abandon the sunnah because of the struggles that we have. We continue to do so in hopes that over time we'll be able to overcome it, right? Because it's a good thing, when you can recite. People, it encourages people. It makes them enthusiastic about coming to pray, right? They say, oh man, so who's leading the prayer? Oh, yeah. It makes people enthusiastic. Sometimes you hear an adhan recited. Some people recite the adhan, it's like, oh man, I gotta go to the masjid. Some people recite it, it's like, oh man, well, I guess I'm staying home today. So it's one of those things we just deal with, and we work at it. We keep fighting it. We don't abandon the good work out of fear that we may be doing it for people, but we just simply struggle with those urges and with those thoughts, among other things. So Riya, some of the signs that one is to show off are that, for one, an individual may be lazy to begin with. Laziness, general laziness. It says that sometimes is a sign of just an individual who's looking for the approval of others, right? I'm not doing it because, nobody really likes me, so I'm just, depression kind of can develop with some people because, they feel rejected by others. Or a sign could be that when people are around, now I want to do more worship, right? I don't pray any sunnahs at home, but as soon as I get to the masjid, oh man, Allahu Akbar, 6, 8, 10 nafilah, right? I'm doing all these raka'ats, right, inside the masjid. Why? Because I'm excited now, people around. And many of us are tested by that. And then it could be that, okay, well, and when people are not around, I don't do as much, or I may increase, every time someone praises me, I do more. Yeah, mashallah. And then I give more charity, or I pray longer, or I fast more days. And we hear people talk about, man, mashallah, he's always fasting. And you probably don't. It's like, oh man, I'm going to fast because people think that I always fast. Which is, again, it's not necessarily a bad thing. But if it's, it's just our intention. It's always about checking our intention. And then when people, they blame me or they censor me, then, okay, well, I'm going to do less now because people are saying bad things about me. Right? So those are usually signs that one is suffering from this particular illness or this malady of the heart. So يطهر القلب من الرياء وحسد عجب وكل داء. Now riya, of course, definitely was a problem for shaitan, for Iblis in the garden. But the next sin of jealousy is probably the more pronounced of them that actually comes out when you reflect upon the story of Iblis and Allah's commandment to him and the angels to prostrate to Adam alayhi salam. For that reason, it's said that the very first sin by which Allah was disobeyed was the sin of jealousy. Yeah, so jealousy was the very first sin, right, that was committed against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Jealousy. And it was Iblis himself. Why don't you prostrate? You created me from this and created him from that. But the root of it was jealousy. It was hasad. And so hasad or jealousy is defined as the desire or the dislike. The dislike of the favor being given to someone else and the desire to see it removed from them. Right, so dislike of a blessing, the dislike of a blessing being given to someone else and the desire to see it removed from them. So that is fundamentally. So in this manzila, this rank that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given to Iblis, to get Adam alayhi salam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Iblis, subhanAllah, Iblis wanted it to be removed. He didn't like the fact that Allah gave Adam this elevated status. Right? He looked at Adam. The angels looked at Allah when he told them prostrate. They looked at Allah. Iblis looked at Adam, and he couldn't do it. And so this was jealousy. So the hadith says that إن الحسد يأكل الحسنات كما تأكل النار الحطب. That envy, it devours one's good deeds in the same way that fire devours firewood. Now the person who is envious towards another is subjecting him or herself to punishment in two ways. One in this life and one in the after. So the torment that they experience in this life is just simply the fact that they see all of these blessings being conferred upon the person towards whom they are envious. And they think that through their envy, it's going to remove the blessing, but it doesn't. And so, and that torments them, that tortures them inside. And so they're punished inside just by seeing it. And then even if there's one person whose blessing is removed, there are always going to be others around who have similar blessings. So they're constantly tormented by seeing so many people with the same blessing that they want themselves, but they don't have. they don't have, be it wealth, be it knowledge, be it beauty, be it status, be it so many different things. And so we see that person, we want Allah, you don't deserve it. Right? And that's the second aspect of the punishment, is that the envious person fundamentally is questioning God's wisdom, questioning Allah's wisdom. As if we're saying that Allah made a mistake in giving that person what He's given to them. And this is fundamentally the reason that Iblis was cursed. It wasn't simply because he disobeyed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he was cursed. Because Adam disobeyed too, but Allah didn't curse Adam. The reason he was cursed is because he questioned Allah's wisdom. Even though he didn't say explicitly. He didn't say it explicitly, but it was as if he was saying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you created me from fire, I created him from clay. Fire is better than that. If there's anyone who is more worthy of being prostrated to, is me. I can see that. Why can't you? He's questioning Allah's wisdom. So he's cursed because of that. So we have to be very careful not to follow in the footsteps of the shaitan. La tattabi'u khutuwat al-shaitan. Right? Because if we do so, then we end up like the shaitan. So the person who's envious is constantly tormented by seeing these people with all these blessings around him or her, but then also is putting his or her soul at risk to eternal damnation by questioning Allah's decree, by trying to act as God, by saying, I'm the one who should determine who gets what. I think so-and-so deserves that. Or I think I deserve it and so-and-so doesn't deserve it. And we don't understand why Allah gave it to those people. It's a test. Maybe He gave it to those people because He believes that those people could handle those blessings and not just reject faith in Him. Whereas if He gave it to you, you would reject faith in Allah. Or maybe the blessing is a sign of the curse of Allah on them. Right? Maybe Allah gave them opportunity to show gratitude, and they just simply rejected it, the opportunities over and over and over, and then Allah sealed their hearts and said, فَتَحْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ أَبْوَابَ كُلِّ شَيْءٍ. He opened up for them the doors to everything. Here, go, you can have it. That's why I say this is a famous story, or I guess you would say it's passed off as a hadith. It's not a hadith, but there is a saying that goes that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He answers the prayer of the hypocrite right away. Why? Because Allah, He doesn't want to hear. He says, okay, get out of my face. Go away. But the believer, he prolongs the response because Allah, He loves to hear the believer beg and ask for more and more and more. Right. I believe there's some truth to that, personally. So the person who's envious should think about the very fact that even if Allah had made every single person on this planet prostrate to you, you become the subject of the prostration of every single thing on the planet, that they won't last forever. They're going to leave at some time anyway, It's not going to last forever. That is not permanent. So this is what we talked about with regard to envy, or envy or jealousy. And then he goes on to say, وَعُجْبٍ وَكُلِّ دَاءِ. And then he talks about vanity or narcissism, self-love, self-amazement. And self-amazement is defined as the magnification of the blessing that one has while forgetting the one gave him the blessing. So magnifying the blessing that one has while forgetting the giver of the blessing. Right? So a person, mu'jab bi nafsi. I'm so pretty, I'm so handsome, right? I'm so rich, right? I'm so healthy. I'm so learned. Whatever it may be, you're just impressed with yourself. And they say that one of the differences between kibr and ujub, between arrogance and vanity, is that you don't need another person in order to be vain. You need another person in order to be arrogant, because your arrogance has to be directed towards someone. But if vanity itself, narcissism is like, well, I don't need anybody around. It's like, I'm just so full of myself. Man, look how nice I am. I'm such a nice person. I know so much. I have so much. So al-Ujub, you have to be aware of Ujub. And then the scholars actually differ about if kibr or arrogance originates from vanity or if vanity originates from arrogance. That's one of those things. Because Sheikh Ahmed Zarruq says that vanity, that kibr originates from vanity. So, at any rate, and so these three vices or three acts of the heart, three prohibitions of the heart, we call them, Riya, ostentation, Hasad, envy or jealousy, and Ujub, vanity or narcissism. These three things, if we gain mastery over them, then it's easier for us to gain mastery over other things. Sheikh Ahmed Zarruq actually goes on, he mentions 4 different most important prohibitions of the heart. And one of them is anger. He adds anger amongst those things as well. And he said that the aslul ghadab, the origin of the source of anger is ru'yatun nafs, is that you see yourself. That you see yourself. Right? So meaning that, like, don't you know who I am? Right? People, they attack you and they offend you. You know, your child doesn't obey you. Your wife, she says certain things to you, and you get ready to, you get all puffed up, and you're like, don't you know who I am? You get angry. Or it'd be vice versa. Your husband says something to you, right? And you get angry. Why? Because I'm responding to myself. Ru'yatun nafs. And he says that ilajuhu, its treatment is for you to reflect upon all of your bad characteristics, the ones you know and the ones you hear about. Right. So it means you kind of have to have your ear open as well, because people talk about people. So you hear things about yourself from others. All right. Fikran wa naqlan. Right. So what you know and then what you hear from others, what's transmitted to you. So if something may be with you, ask Allah, say, if that is in me, may Allah remove it. May Allah remove it from me. But in doing so, that is what helps. But and he also mentions bukhl, stinginess is another example of a prohibited act of the heart. And he said that the origin, the source of stinginess is khawf al-faqr, is the fear of poverty. And so in order for us to treat the fear of poverty or treat stinginess or miserliness, we need to reflect upon the fact that everything in this world will one day come to an end. Everything's fleeting. And the state of the world, it also is changed. It changes all the time. Some people in 2008, some people were very rich. Stock market crashed. Everything was gone. Right? That's the state of the world, the nature of the world. Why should I fear poverty? Why should I be stingy? Today I could be poor, tomorrow's rich. And then changes again. If I'm generous to people today and then I become poor, maybe they'll be generous to me when they become rich, right? Why should I fear poverty, right? And then وَاعْلَمْ بِأَنَّ أَصْلَ لِلْآفَاتِ حُبُّ الرِّيَاسَةِ وَتَرْوَآتِ. And I'll end with these 2 and then 2 following verses. And it says, and know that the source of all defects is the love of status and the relinquishing of the hereafter. So the love of status, he said, that is the source of all of this. So even if the 3 chief defects or 3 chief prohibitions of the heart are ostentation, jealousy, and vanity, that the source of all of them, those 3 and the others, is first and foremost the love of the world. I mean, love of status. Love of status is one thing. The love of status is one thing, So, and they say that the last of all of the different ills of the heart that leaves the person on the path to behavior refinement is this. All of us love status. All of us love to be on top. Right? It's part of our nature that we love to be treated and pampered. We're treated a certain way and pampered, right? Right. He said, but this is the last of those things that leave the heart of the Siddiq or the heart of the Murid. It's the last of those things that leave the heart. So I know that the source of all defects is the love of status and the relinquishing of the hereafter. That is to say that we forget about not only that there will be a judgment, but also there will be death. And if we're constantly reminding ourselves about death, then we don't hope for too much. Because when we hope for too much, we plan for a whole lot as well. And if we're planning for a whole lot, it's likely that we're going to neglect our fundamental duties that we owe to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, especially when in relation to matters of wealth. This is why Ibn Ata'illah has a verse in his Hikam, and he says, اجتهادك فيما ضمن منك اجتهادك فيما ضمن منك وتقصيرك مما اجتهادك فيما ضمن لك وتقصيرك فيما ضمن منك طلب منك دليل على انطماس البصيرة منك. He said that your diligence and your effort, or your due effort with regard to things that are guaranteed for you, and your negligence of things that have been requested from you is a proof that the inner light of your heart has been extinguished. Right? So Allah said your provision is guaranteed. So why put all of your focus in that? Of course, you seek your provision, but it shouldn't be to the point of neglecting your duty to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So we forget about that. And so when we think about death, and they can happen at any time, and the fact that most people die young, right? Then hopefully it'll lead us to get our things right focus. And then lastly, رأس الخطايا هو حب العاجلة ليس الدواء إلا في ذي التراريلة. The head of all sins is the love of the fleeting life. The only antidote is in being compelled toward Him. So he said the head of all sins is the love of this world. And there's a hadith, even though it's a weak hadith, it says, حُبُّ الدُّنْيَا رَأْسُ كُلِّ خَطِيئَةٍ, that the love of the world is the chief of every sin. And so love of status and then love of the dunya are things that we definitely have to be extremely wary about. And it doesn't mean that we need to hate the dunya either, because the dunya is a matiyah. It is a mount for us for the hereafter. Mazra'atul akhirah is the planting ground for the hereafter. We shouldn't hate the dunya, but we should be definitely wary about it. We should not allow our hearts to become attached to it, and we should struggle against allowing our hearts to become attached to things in this world, to this world. And he said, but the only antidote is what? The only antidote is being compelled towards Him. That is to be compelled towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because many people, they can't overcome their vices. They struggle with them so much. And regardless of what they do, inside of programs and different attempts to self-help and different type 12-step, things like that, there's some people, they're never able to overcome certain vices. Prayer, dua, extremely important. Turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And in time, inshallah, He'll help us to overcome those things. So with that, open things up to any questions we might have opportunities to answer during the remainder of the time. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Is the way that I have a question. Is the way that I teach somewhat difficult? Is it a little? No? Alhamdulillah. I just wanted to be sure. So it's kind of, at times I feel that maybe kind of go over a little bit too fast and sometimes over people's heads. So go ahead. Tafadhal. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, the question in relationship, fundamental question was that is it when we talk about dispositions, do we say that an individual has a single or multiple types of dispositions? We have a number of dispositions. Of course, our nature, we have natures. You can say that, or second natures. That's the idea that if you think of disposition, in particular in the context of vice, if you think of it as an addiction or as a it's probably not the words, I've lost for words, but it's not just simply a bad habit. We're talking about a type of what I call vice, a type of inclination towards something. So if a person may be a thief, right? And some people, they steal since they're young, and they just develop this habit of just stealing every opportunity. So nobody's around. Oh man, it looks nice, and they just grab it. Some people are like that. I have family members who are like that. It's a compulsive type of behavior. Lying as well. Some people, they get so used to telling stories, making up stories, that even when they don't really need to make up a story, they do so. So that's the example of two different dispositions, right? One is disposed towards lying, and one is disposed towards theft, right? So yeah, it's about multiple dispositions. So when I talk about disposition, I'm just talking about, this is your state, you're just evil, you have a disposition of evil. It's like, no, we have different vices. Like for instance, let's think of smoking cigarettes, for instance. To me, that's a vice. It's not just an act. It's a vice. People become addicted to cigarette smoking. It's hard for them to stop it. They just have to light one up, right? And then they go, that one finishes out, and they light up another one, because their brain has tricked them into thinking that they can't live without it, right? And other drugs as well. And so what you say about vice, you say about virtue, the same thing about virtue. And I'll give you, I think, probably a practical example of this, but it's not completely in the type of example that I really want. Hopefully a better example will come up. But think about this. Many people accept Islam, and they've never prayed before the way that Muslims pray. And then they learn that you have to make wudu. And in making wudu, one thing you have to do is you have to rinse out your nose. For many people, that's like, other than like trying to clean out my nose if I have a nosebleed, like on a regular schedule, I have to clean my nose out. That's a big deal for some people. It doesn't feel normal. You see, but after time, and they get used to praying, they get used to wudu, that say that person misses a prayer, right? Or makes a mistake and doesn't make wudu, or has to make tayammum and doesn't make wudu because they found out it was permissible, and so they had to make it, feel comfortable. So just that discomfort that comes with it means that there's a certain level of virtue that exists within that person, if we think of that as a virtue. And we can apply that as well to things like honesty, for instance. A person was accustomed to not being very honest, but then they tested and tried themselves over and over and over until eventually speaking truthfulness, became easy. Giving up lying became easy for them, you see. So they acquired a virtue. So even when there's not opportunity to speak to someone and be truthful, they want to be. You understand? I feel like being honest. That's what we call virtue, the state of wanting to be there even when you don't have the opportunity. And the same thing when you think about, for instance, vice, rape, for instance, a rapist. The crime of the rapist is a vice. It's not just an act. You follow me? Because the rapist is constantly looking for an opportunity to do so, or the pedophile is looking for the opportunity to do so. You see, and this is why in our society, those particular types of crimes are not dealt with in the same way as things like murder. Like, and I worked in the prison before, so you'll find that the people who are in prison for sex crimes, when it was time for them to be paroled, none of the, we call the halfway houses, wanted to take them in. They were afraid that if they took them in, that these guys are going to go out and they're going to rape somebody, and then they would be held responsible for it, you see. So they said, no. So they would go to the parole board, and so they would look for, you got to find a home plan. You have to find, if your family's ready for you to come home, then we just send you straight home to your family, right? So, and then also because the rapist ultimately doesn't get enjoyment out actually having intercourse. That's not really where the ultimate enjoyment that comes for the rapist, according to, you read this sort of the psychological profile of the rapist. It comes from feeling like they have complete control of another person, right? You follow me? That's fundamentally where their enjoyment really comes from, you see. So it's a vice. It's a serious problem for many people in our society. And often those same people, they experience the same type of abuse when they're young, and this is how they get that way. And I've counseled some of these people before as well. People are very broken people, especially those who are really trying to do better. It's difficult. Yes. I can sit down. It is a habit. A vice and a virtue are a habit. Right. So I think of habit in the sense of it's second nature. If it's second nature, it's something that I'm going to do. You understand? Just when I have the opportunity. But if we think, often when we think of habit, we think of an act, right? So it's habit, but it's a little bit more than habit. It's actually, you're talking about your actual state, your intention, your desires, what you ultimately want to do on a regular basis. Right, so that we say patience is a virtue, right? Really what they mean is temperance is a virtue, which means that when you are confronted by a test of your appetite, you resist, right? It's a virtue. Say, no, I know, I used to smoke, I used to smoke cigarettes, and, when the guy comes in the room with a cigarette, I want that cigarette, but you know what? No. Right? Or some called chastity is, I resist the temptation. Right? But after a while, even, the struggle is not that difficult. And I've developed true virtue at that point, you see. I've overcome my weaknesses and my cravings, among other things. Right? And now that's not to say that every single thing it is praiseworthy for us to not have a desire for something. Right? Because yes, fasting, we of course test our appetite for food, drink, sexual intercourse. Charity, we test our appetites for wealth, right? So, in the slot, of course, all of that is just simply out the door. You can't do any of those different things, but we have to eat, we have to drink. Some things are just natural appetites, that is not considered to be good to overcome, to be without an appetite, because otherwise we just wouldn't exist, right? Both the sexual and the non-sexual appetite. You wouldn't exist, right? Without them. We would die from starvation, or we would die from a lack of procreation, right? Right. So these things are not evil in themselves. It's just the idea is that we have to gain the mastery over them. Even anger, for instance. Anger is not always bad. Anger is not always bad. Think about it. You're married and somebody touches your wife. It's like, well, I'm not supposed to get angry. That's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. Don't get angry. How can I not get angry when it's my nature to get angry? If that's the case, then we know the hadith doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean don't get angry. It means don't act on your anger. That's really what it means. Don't act on your anger. Man abghada lillahi, right? Man ahabba lillahi wa abghada lillahi, right? So the person who أعطى لله ومنع لله وأبغض أحب لله وأبغض لله فقد استكمل إيمانه, that whoever gives for Allah and denies for Allah, loves for Allah and hates for Allah, that person has perfected his or her faith, right? So anger has its place on the battlefield. It's like, what if I'm not angry with my enemy? It's like, hey, I'm so happy, let's fight. I'm going to chop off your head. It's like, yeah. There has to be some level of anger involved if you're going to fight, if you defend yourself. So anger is good sometimes. Same thing with arrogance. Arrogance is not always bad. It's not always bad. Okay. If an individual is exhibiting arrogant behavior towards me, can I not do the same towards them? Or is it something blameworthy if I do the same thing towards them? There's a saying amongst the moralists, the Sufis. They say that "At-takabburu al-mutakabbiri sadaqa." Showing arrogance towards the arrogant person is an act of charity. Right. So things they're not these emotions. The appetite is not evil in their essence. It's just that what results from them, what can result from them, can become evil. We're concerned with the consequences of those things. It's like a person can have a racist thought, for instance. I see you and it's like, oh, I don't like it because of the way you look, your color, right? It's, oh man, But that's my first thought. But what if my second thought is stuck for the law, right? Stuck for the law, and I change it, and I say, you know what? I'm judging the person by his cover. I got to give them a chance to learn their character, among other things, right? That's a good thing, that I resist that thought. You see, so does that help? Inshallah. Mm-hmm. No, go ahead. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. There's a difference between vanity and arrogance. Arrogance is defined as the rejection of truth and the belittlement of people. Right. So the rejection of truth first and foremost has to be directed towards someone else's truth, right? So truth is an external to you to begin with. And then belittlement of people, other people, again. So I see you and say, oh, you're nothing. You're worthless, all right? But if I'm vain, I'm just like, I'm so lovely, right? Now, me thinking I'm so lovely, if I'm thinking of some other person, I say, yeah, I'm prettier than that sister right there. Now I'm in the realm of arrogance, right? Right. But if I'm just like, alhamdulillah, mashallah, tabarakallah, right? Then I'm vain. Right. Now, yeah. Anything else? Yes, sir.
Okay, let me see if I can get this one in. What's the best thing to remember regarding vice and virtue in zaman?
The best thing to remember regarding vice and virtue in zaman. Well, I think the best thing to remember concerning vice and virtue, concerning the end of time, is no different than with regard to what's the best thing to remember with regard to the end of your life. we shouldn't obsess about the end of times because we have an end of our lives to be concerned with as well. And I don't think there's anything different than I can say other than what we already know from Allah and His Messenger about preparing for the meeting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, hoping that we want our final deeds to be the best of our deeds. We want the best of our days to be the days that we meet our Creator. And so we work assiduously in our lives in order to prepare for that meeting, remind ourselves of death, and which is in our culture today, other than seeing death happening in other places, I think we're still very much oblivious to it. If you have family members who have died, I think you probably are a bit more attuned to the ideas about death and the reality of it. All right, especially if they're recent deaths of family members, those are things that you should be definitely concerned about. Is that all of us are going to die, all of us are leaving this place, and everybody, your lungs are going to stop working, your heart is going to stop beating, and but then there's something after that. There's something after that, and we have to be ready for it. So I would just say that as long as we are doing our best to become better people, and I mean literally doing our best to become better people, then I think we shouldn't have much to worry about with regard to the end of times or even our deaths. And part of doing our best is learning as much as we possibly can about our religion, and in particular learning much as possibly can about our Creator and how He works with us. He works with us in our lives, inshallah. I hope that answer is sufficient.
Thank you. And there was another one. I actually asked the sister if she could restate the question because I'm not sure if there was actually a mistake, but I'll put that out there to see if it's comprehensible. She said, in the beginning of guidance, it states that your lower self seeks knowledge if it takes time to respond. Can you please explain?
The lower self seeks knowledge. And what's the rest of it?
It says, in the beginning of guidance, it states that your lower self seeks knowledge if it takes time to respond. Can you please explain?
The lower self seeks knowledge if it takes time to respond. I mean, I would probably have to have the exact quote in order to really expound upon it.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking.
So I really couldn't say exactly what that may be referring to right now.
Thank you.
Was there something else there? Or? No, تفضل. أكيد السلام. وياكم. Right. Well, actually, what I said, I tried to avoid this being misinterpreted as a hadith. And I sort of preface it by saying that, it's something that's out there, people say, and with regard to how Allah answers the prayer of the hypocrite right away, but delays the answer to the prayer of the believer because he loves to hear and listen to the believer beg and beg and beg. Whereas the hypocrite, he doesn't like to listen to the hypocrite beg because the hypocrite is not sincere to begin with, and the hypocrite is only looking for worldly advantage and is an opportunist as well. So I mean, Allah knows best. If that's the reality of the situation. I personally like it. When I've heard that. When I first heard that said to me, I liked the way that sounded. It sounded reasonable and logical enough, but I just couldn't say that it's something that the Prophet ﷺ said. No. All right. Now.
That was it from the online questions.
Say again?
That was it from the online questions. Thank you.
Okay, great. Jazakumullah khairan. So if there's nothing else, then we will conclude, and I appreciate everybody coming out again once again. And so we'll resume next week, and we will begin with the verse where the author says, يَصْحَبُ شَيْخًا عَارِفًا مَسَارِكَ يَقِيهِ فِي طَرِيقِهِ الْمَهَارِكَ. One should accompany a sheikh acquainted with the spiritual paths. He will shield him on his way from the perilous roads. So we'll start with that section. I know it's going to be a little bit controversial for some people, but it's something that needs to be spoken about. Inshallah. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammadin wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Wa subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Wal 'asr innal insana lafi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa 'amilus salihat wa tawasaw bil haqqi wa tawasaw bis sabr. Wa subhana rabbika rabbil 'izzati 'amma yasifun wa salamun 'alal mursalin walhamdulillahi rabbil 'alamin. Ameen. Assalamu alaykum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.